Hello, welcome back to Web and X Files. My name is Keith and today's discussion is about vampires. I love the story of vampires and I've got a few people on here who also enjoy the stories of vampires. Today's vampire story is another cool story. This dates back to the early 1920s when a man had been admitted to a hospital in London with a strange deep wound at his neck. The man couldn't remember what had happened. He said he was turning around the corner when he felt an agonizing stabbing sensation in his neck, which caused him to drop to the floor and pass out. He didn't see anyone, he couldn't hear anyone. He said he just doesn't remember anything. He just remembers this pain in the neck dropping. Now, a few hours later, there was another gentleman who was brought into the hospital with a similar wound. He too had felt a sharp pain in his neck and lost consciousness. And this was in the very same stretch of road the previous man was walking. He said when he turned the corner near Piccadilly Circus, this thing had hit him and dropped him. Now, the second figure was unable to give a description of the assailant because there had been no one around him whatsoever. Now, was that such a coincidence that one man and then another man brought in? But then a third man had been brought in. This third man was taken to the same hospital, and he too had a deep laceration in his neck, which he'd received at this very same location as these two previous men. The People newspaper covered the story, and then rumours of vampires began to escalate. The title in the papers was The Invisible Attacker, and he was never apprehended by the police, and the case has all the case has all hallmarks of a classic attack of a vampire. Now, as films and Hollywood have you believe, vampires don't turn into bats and fly off. That was created by Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's not the case for real vampires as such, if they do exist. Now, the data from actual attacks, it would seem that these strange beings have the ability to bilocate, teleport, and transfer through space and time. They either do this in a physical form or a psychic form, where they project themselves through astral projection, perhaps. And these genuine vampire really often bite people's neck to draw off the blood. Instead, it usually draws off the very life energy that humans have, which leaves them feeling physically unwell and mentally exhausted. And in fact, the symptoms of these vampires' assaults are identical to a condition that is now becoming more and more common in the civilized world. The condition is ME, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is it's a benign but a debilitating condition which occurs out of the blue. It causes headaches, weakness, it causes fatigue, it causes pain, it just causes very awful symptoms. Now, there are said to be hundreds of thousands of people affected by this in the UK. And the medical practitioners are still unable to agree on the nature of ME. Some think it's just, pardon me, sorry, all in the person's head. And however it is, whatever the cause, these strange conditions impact people's lives so much. Now, no one had ever heard of ME in the 60s and 70s, but another story of a female who was struck down with ME-like symptoms. A doctor had examined her and initially had diagnosed flu, but the girl returned a few weeks later, accompanied by her mum. She was very pale and lethargic and had marks on her neck and her breasts. The GP identified these discolorations as love bites and confirmed and concluded that the girl was suffering with some sort of fever or autoimmune disease. And the girl was very much offended by this because she hadn't been with anyone to give her these love bites. They just appeared. And the girl's mum went on to tell the doctor about the daughter's fits of screaming in the dead of night and these awful nightmares which haunted her as she slept. And her own accounts of these night terrors resulted in being referred to a shrink. And after this, she said that once midnight had arrived, she felt a cold and sinister person invading her bedroom. She was unable to see him. She could just sense him, feel him. And then on one occasion, she'd seen a young man in black appear at the foot of her bed. As she lay there, she was paralyzed with fear and she was unable to give an exact description. But she said that he looked like someone who was at her college, another student from the neighborhood. And the student was an attractive kind of guy, but he had a very gothic-y, creepy appearance about him. And then the girl gave an account of the first assault that she'd come across and could remember in her bedroom. She said she was just drifting off to sleep when she felt a cold hand grope her breasts. She opened her eyes and the room was in darkness. There was no one around. She said, but someone was on top of her and was kissing her neck and biting her. She said she was terrified and she couldn't move or cry or scream. She just closed her eyes and hoped that she was having a bad dream. But when she opened them, he was still there. From the light of the lights outside shining onto the bedroom, she saw that it is the face of a student in her school. The young man was a 20-odd-year-old Hungarian student, and he was tall and he had olive skin and black, slick hair, and he had some dark, piercing eyes. The psychiatrist had quizzed her about the relationship with her dad, and he suspected he might be the nocturnal assailant, but he died years before. The psychiatrist therefore asked if any uncles or male relatives were staying at their house. Only her 6-year-old brother Graham, who was not interested in girls at the time. And then a strange twist in this tale happened. Another girl from the area was also referred to this psychiatrist. The girl had just turned 17. Her body displayed the same strange marks on her breasts, her neck, and she also had the same conditions as this other girl, where she was tired all the time, headaches and so on. Now, she said that, she said that the girl also related on some nights that this ghost got into bed with her and he tried to have intercourse with this girl. Now the girl was terrified because she said it's not real, ghosts aren't real, and she thought it was another lucid dream. Now the psychiatrist had asked this other girl to describe what the ghost looked like, and the descriptions matched the girl in college's description, very same. So the psychiatrist began to think this is more than just a crazy person. For how two people who don't know each other are able to come up with the same story, the same experience. Now, she said that the apparition was tall, dark and handsome, but he was very creepy. He had black hair and dark penetrating eyes. The psychiatrist also suggested that perhaps it had been a nightmare, but the girl insisted she'd been awake throughout these ordeals. And these ordeals continued for months. She said that she'd spotted someone who was identical to him. She didn't know his name, but she knew which street where he lived. And it happened to be the very same street where this Hungarian student lived. Now, the police were unable to quiz the student because of these strange allegations. They couldn't just go and knock on his door. So they needed to study and wait and see. And one day, the shrink decided to go for a walk and see if he could meet this stranger. He knocked on the door where this student lived, and the landlady who ran the house, and asked the psychiatrist to come in. So the psychiatrist explained he was looking for a Hungarian student. So the landlady shouted down, and then down the stairs came this tall, dark, handsome Hungarian student. Now, as the student glided down the stairs, he had a smiley smirk on his face as he was greeted by the psychiatrist. Now, the psychiatrist introduced himself and asked if he was able to speak to him in private, and the student agreed and beckoned him up the stairs to his room. Now the student was using the room as an art studio, and there were several canvases and portraits propped up on easels, and these were all of female nude artists, and most of them were incomplete. The shrink was intrigued to see that his two patients' unfinished portraits were there before his very eyes. Now, being a psychiatrist, he could not make sense of it because, as far as he was concerned, these things don't exist, it's all in the mind. But yet, he was looking at the identical description of this student. Now, After this, where he witnessed the students' pictures, the psychiatrist asked who were these girls he had posed in the pictures who were naked, and the student claimed girls from his imagination. Now, the psychiatrist smirked as he looked at the Hungarian student and said, "Cut the crap. What are you? Who are you? How are you inflicting this damage to these poor girls?" And he added that both girls had identified this predator. And he then asked if he had any theories as to why these girls might be dreaming of him. The Hungarian student was unable to look at the psychiatrist in the face, and after shrugging off the psychiatrist's comments, he continued to look away to not make eye contact with the shrink. And after he shrugged off the question, he made busy of himself arranging paint tubes and the canvas and paper and whatnot. And then the psychiatrist felt he was starting to feel really uneasy in the presence of this student. And he reached to the door, and the student had turned and asked him, "So, Doc, what do you think of the girls' stories? Do you believe them?" The psychiatrist felt every hair on his neck stand up, and he didn't turn around to confront him. He just stared ahead, and he mumbled, "I don't quite know." When he returned home, the psychiatrist found his cat was lying dead on the doorstep. There were no signs of any physical injury. There was nothing on the cat's body to suggest that he'd been killed. So he took it to the vet, who was a friend of his, and the vet was unable to establish the cause of death. And the psychiatrist felt his pet's death was somehow connected to this creepy, sinister student. Now, on the following night, he was watching TV, and the mirror above his fireplace was split in half with a loud crack. And he could not explain the cracked mirror, and later that same night when he went to bed, he distinctively caught a glimpse of a man's silhouette standing at the top of the stairs. The shadow-like figure vanished at a split second after the psychiatrist had seen it. And it looked like it was the outline of the student he'd seen earlier that week. That guy, that creepy Hungarian guy. Now, he knew that he hadn't imagined this story, that this figure was really there. Now, he'd never told his fiancée or any of his family about these strange incidents. And then one night, him and his fiancée were lying in bed together. When she woke up choking, she felt a pair of cold, strong hands wrapped round her throat, and they were throttling her. As soon as she managed to scream out, the strangling sensation stopped. She was so sure that there was an attacker in the room with them. She jumped out of the bed and rushed to switch on the light, but there was nobody there. This psychiatrist had racked his brains trying to figure out what had just happened. And he knew he had to defeat this Hungarian guy, but he just didn't know where to begin. Because he was a man of scientific explanations, and yet he was faced with something that goes against everything he believes in. Now, he sat there pondering on what this could be, what if the Hungarian student was some form of entity, creature, vampire? He then went and got 2 copies of the Bibles, 3 small crucifixes, and he left 1 copy of the Bible in Judith's bedroom and the other copy in Zara's bedroom, the 2 students. He left a copy with each of these girls. Now the girls he gave the crucifixes to, he told them to wear it when they went to bed. The psychologist then wore the 3rd crucifix on a chain around his neck, and when he went to bed he turned off his light and settled, ready for bed. Then, in a low, gruff voice, seething with hate in his ear, was whispered, "I'll break your neck one day," in his dark, creepy voice. And the voice sounded as if it was coming from someone who was next to the bedside table. For as long as those 2 girls wore the crucifixes and left the Bibles in their rooms, they enjoyed a quiet night's sleep, and they regained their zest for life, and the purple constitutions quickly faded from their bodies. Contusions had left. Now, sometime later, the psychiatrist went to the lodging house to speak to the Hungarian student once again, and this time he carried the Bible and he wore the crucifix around his neck, ready to confront him. And he knocked upon the door of the lodger's house. The landlady had opened the door and asked, "Can I help you?" Now, she said that the student was no longer here. He left abruptly one night and he's not been back, and neither did he leave a forwarding address. The psychiatrist experimented with the Bibles and the crucifixes. It seemed to do the job with himself and these girls, and he struggled for many years to rationalize the case of this Hungarian vampire. But strangely, in the October of the early 90s, there was a haunting report that the very house where the teenager had lived in the 70s, a young woman had woke one morning at 4 a.m. and was confronted by a strange guy in black. He had his arms stretched out, floating close to the ceiling directly above their bed. The woman was naturally terrified by this floating phantom, and she hid under the covers, terrified and shaking with fear. She summoned up enough courage to have another look and found the black figure had vanished. Was this the same Hungarian student who'd come back to find his victims once again? According to acupuncturists of ancient China, the health of a person depended on the life force of qi, yin and yang. But if it didn't flow smoothly through the body, physical and mental conditions arose. Now, qi is regarded as the very essence of life and the soul, circulating under the skin through various channels and meridians. And science has proved beyond doubt that the human body is buzzing with electrical fields. And furthermore, any interference with these fields can have a person with some serious conditions. Now, perhaps this is how the creepy student and similar people like him prey on their unsuspecting victims by sapping out their life energy. For all we know, these vampires may be at large at this very moment. Do you live next door to one? Am I one? Are you one? And we have had an increase of conditions of ME all over. So it's very strange. What do you make of this strange vampire story? I believe there's some truth in this. I hope you enjoyed this story. If so, smash the like button and I will see you all in the next video. God bless.